Good evening. Welcome to the Episcopal Creation Care Gathering Network Deep Dive for Thursday, August 13th, 2026. Tonight we are talking about the season of creation, and our guest mentors are John Elliott Lein and Jay Johnson. So I'll let them introduce themselves and talk about the season of creation. Thank you so much for being here and sharing information with us.
Well, I'm glad to be with you all. I'm a priest up in Downeast Maine, which until I moved to Maine, I thought was in the Portland area, but actually is kind of in the opposite. We're right up next to Canada, way out in the middle of nowhere in the beautiful nature. I have two small parishes about an hour apart, and I go back and forth between them every other Sunday. And so we do a lot of lay-led services, and that'll come up in what we talk about today. The reason I've been involved a little bit, helped out with some speaking at a conference a few years ago with your group, met some people there, and then I've been working with the Reverend Margaret Bullitt-Jonas Jones for the last several years on a guide to liturgically celebrate the season of creation in the Episcopal tradition, kind of a complement to the ecumenical resources at the seasonofcreation.org. So I would like to be able to share a little bit of that with you and maybe a few notes on how I've implemented this in my parishes. And then I'm hoping that our other speaker will have lots to add as well. So Jay, would you introduce yourself?
Happy to. Thanks, John. And my name is Jay Johnson. I'm also a priest, and I'm serve as the rector of All Saints Parish in Saugatuck, Michigan. We are right on, if you know the little hand thing, we're over here. We're on the west coast of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. We're right on the Lake Michigan shoreline, and it's a beautiful dunes ecosystem here in the Great Lakes. And I'm thrilled, very grateful to John and Margaret and those who have put together all of those resources. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we've been using them here at All Saints in just a bit. But I'm just delighted to be able to participate in this conversation.
Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started unless Heather has anything else.
I'd love for people to introduce themselves in the chat if they would like, for who they are and where they're from. And that may help Jay and John as they do their presentation to know your context.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'd like to start with is a little bit of overview of the season of creation. Now, I assume most of you have at least some familiarity here, so I'm not going to go in deep. If you have questions, we can cover those in the discussion. So if you don't know, season of creation has been developing over the last few decades across churches. It kind of started with the Eastern Orthodox in the 1980s. One of their leaders established a feast of creation on September 1st. And this began to connect with other people in other churches who recognized the need for incorporating creation, thought of creation, prayer for creation in their services. And we've kind of been gradually picking it up. And it's been growing somewhat rapidly, I feel, in the last decade, 5 years or so, with the seasonofcreation.org, an ecumenical website that helps churches from the Catholic to various Protestant denominations and our tradition to celebrate with a particular theme every year. And there's a new article that came out yesterday. I would love to draw your attention to. I'm going to put it in the chat here, the link to it. This is in the Christian Century, which hopefully you can get that article. Like I said, just came out yesterday. I have not had the time to review it thoroughly, but it gives a good background on the establishment now of a feast of creation with Christ. this are in Christ. This is brand new. It is now. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here to show a little bit of this article. I urge you to read that. Take a look at the background of this season, and what a few different things. It gives some history. It gives some distinctions. And this is something that's been developing over the last, I think, 3 years. Been international travel, going to St. Assisi to consult between all the different churches, and really decided to come together and add a new feast to the calendar, which is huge. This feast comes, I believe, the Orthodox. One of the reasons they picked September 1st is it has something to do with the start of their year. To start with creation is an acknowledgement that, and putting in Christ in the title is going back to Christ as the Word, the Logos, there at the beginning. So there's a lot of deep theology that's being done in connecting. This is not simply layering on a level of environmentalism on the church. This is acknowledging that we've had a lack in the church for a long time over this element. So I'm highlighting this paragraph here where that is mentioned. So I'll let you read the rest of it. For me, and I would love to have Jay speak to this, and I would love to have others speak to this, I thought of kind of three general reasons why we might celebrate the season and the feast, distinct from acknowledging creation, celebrating creation all year. One is it's always good to just have a marker, have a specific time. But why creation? Why incorporate that into liturgy? And generally, three areas that I think you will all be familiar with, but maybe gives you a way to articulate this to those who are more reluctant or wondering, why is it we would do this? One of them, I think, is just purely practical. We acknowledge the environmental crisis. We want to make sure to bring awareness to extinction events and climate change and all of those things. And so it's important to have a season set aside to focus on these things because they're part of our work as Christians. Second is inspirational. This has really made a big impact in my parishes. People love nature, they love creation, and to have a time where we use language that is explicitly inviting creation into our prayers, where we might incorporate visuals and songs in different ways, is inspiring for people. They get excited. I have a number of folks who are very traditional, but love nature, and they just love to have this set aside time. For those who are less excited about it, you just tell them, well, it's only a week, it's only 5 weeks. You can put up with it for a little while, and usually they'll relax and start liking it. And then third, theological. And that article I posted definitely has a lot to say on the theology. But just to say that the Christian worldview, the Christian mission sometimes gets too heady in the West. We get so focused on our theory, our books, and our interior lives that we forget the setting that we're in. And so I think this is a good part of the church reorienting and embracing the larger picture of salvation across creation and the world. Jay, do you have anything to add to that introduction? I hope there's some good insights that you have as well.
Thank you, John, very much. I will just basically repeat, but maybe in a different way, what you just said, because I think your reasons, I think the why is a really important question to ask and to invite our faith communities into the work for very specific reasons. And I love your insistence that it's not just layering environmentalism over on the church. It's actually, I find it to be a retrieval of very ancient and deep understandings of the gospel in relation to the wider world of God's creation. And it opens up what I have found in doing this work much more intentionally, it opens up all sorts of other doorways and avenues into Christian traditions, into the Bible. As I've been telling people here at All Saints, you know, as soon as you start looking for other than human animals in Bible stories, they are everywhere. They're almost like it's like in every story, every chapter, it runs throughout the traditions and in some wild and wacky and wonderful ways. And it truly enriches our engagement with the gospel and with our faith, I have found. And I would also just say, kind of in an obvious way, we are incarnational people. We believe that the Word became flesh. That's a very intentional word that the gospel writer of John used. He wrote that the Word became flesh. He didn't say the Word became human. So there's a very important claim being made that the Word of God becomes creature of God. And to be able to embrace that in the wider, more than human world becomes a very rich way of engaging with that foundational claim. I will say in just a few minutes a little bit more about this, but I have also found it really helpful to invite people to see how this work of engaging with God's creation, an ecological faith, if you will, also lends really important insights to our work in dismantling racism and also in our work around gender and sexual justice. So these are all intertwined, is what I'm trying to suggest. And the way we try to embody that at All Saints is what I want to say a little bit about in just a moment. I also am really grateful to our Eastern Orthodox siblings who like to talk about humans as the priests of creation. And so there's this sense in which our calling as humans is to take all the rest of creation and offer it up to God in thanksgiving so that God can offer it back to us as blessing, which is what priests do at the table in the Eucharist all the time. But it's humans, all of us as humans are called to do that, which I find incredibly moving and insightful. So those are, and I guess I would say, uh, every Eucharist we pray in, as our Savior Jesus Christ taught us in the Lord's Prayer, that God's will might be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so the season of creation becomes an opportunity to invite people to think about, well, what does that really mean? If we take that really seriously, how is God's will going to be embodied on earth as it is in heaven? So those are some of the reasons I would, those are exactly what John just said. So forgive me for repeating, but those are a little bit of additions.
Okay, and just to give you a note here, we've now finished our introduction. We'll have two more sections, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion. So you have questions, please keep writing those down, and we will have lots of time for talking. The next section that I will lead is talking about a guide, some resources, and then Jay will come in and give more information about different examples of how he's implemented these things in his church. So this next section here is specifically about a particular resource in our church. And I want to tell you briefly how it came about. Some of you may know the Reverend Margaret Bullitt-Jonas. She has been working in creation care, active in retreats and speaking and books for years, decades. And there was a particular time a few years ago, we were in the same diocese, and I had the chance to meet her for the first time, went to a retreat with her. And this was just after our diocese had celebrated Juneteenth, which happened to be that year on a Sunday. And there was a committee in the diocese that sent out a short little Word document that said, hey, this is what it is. Here's some readings you might use. Here's some hymns you might use. And I thought, well, how, this is a celebration I care about. I want to do something for it, but I'm a busy parish priest or I'm a busy lay leader. How can I have the time to go out, find these resources, put them together? How easy it is to have that presented to me. So I went up to Margaret at the end of her retreat and said, this was a really wonderful resource. Do we have something like this for the season of creation that's coming up in about 6 weeks? She said, no. So, well, would you be interested in working together on one? She said, let's talk about it. And so about a month later, we talked, connected over Zoom, and we ended up putting something together in about 2 weeks, just for our diocese, just for the Diocese of Western Massachusetts, which is very closely connected to the Diocese of Massachusetts and has some connections over with Maine and Vermont. And then actually, I say for some reason, because of this network, I connected with someone who cares deeply about creation in the Southern Gulf Coast. And so all of these dioceses all of a sudden adopted using these resources. And after that, we thought, well, this is interesting. People are using this. We need to update it for the following year. And Margaret really became the driving force behind connecting these things to the church because of her connections. And so it's just grown and grown and grown. At the last time we counted, we had 50 bishops officially endorse the use of these materials for their parishes. We hope it's continued to go up from that. We haven't been doing those yet recently. Last year, we released a perennial version. Essentially, we had already done 3 years. Well, I did the extra work of putting it all together in one. And so now it can just work. We don't have to do a new one every year. And we're hoping that maybe the church will pick this up at a convention someday. But I'm not really sure how all those mechanisms work. I'm just happy to put this together. So now I want to share a little bit about the guide itself and how you, as either clergy or lay people, might get some things being done in your context. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see this screen here? Okay. So you can find this at a website called New Creation Liturgies. It's just a holding place we kind of put together right now. All that's on there is this, but you can always get the newest version there. And it's a PDF at this point. So the advantage is that you can just grab resources right out of this and use them. So it gives you, in the introduction here, to show you what you have to that this covers. A little bit of introductory material from Margaret, and then a new edition, and this is very important for a lot of smaller churches and lay leaders, is we now have resources on how to lead a morning prayer service. In addition to Holy Eucharist. And then there's lots of resources in here that can be used for all kinds of services that you might do during the week. So it's not limited to Holy Eucharist, but it is very much focused on our liturgical tradition as Episcopalians. What are the resources that we have that can complement the Catholics and the Protestants of other kinds? So I'll let you take the time to go through that anytime you want because it's freely available. But just to give you a sense of materials, you have this introduction. A lot of this comes from a couple of different resources, but a lot of it's from Margaret. And then the lectionary. I'm going to come back to the lectionary because it's got a lot of moving parts to it. And I just want to show you briefly what it looks like to use these resources. So if you're planning a service, this is the service for Holy Eucharist, if you're a priest or you're trying to encourage your local priest to use it. And what it's going to do is it's just going to walk through the same order we have in our Book of Common Prayer and just offer alternatives. And it is not meant, you reassure your priest or reassure yourself that it's not meant to wholesale replace. You're just supposed to copy paste this whole thing. It's meant to say, as you go through, consider something like this. Consider maybe adding this part, but not that part. And it partly is trying to draw your attention to things that already exist. Very little of this was me writing something new. This was doing the work of finding what was already there across the Anglican tradition and across the Christian tradition and saying, hey, we've always had this. Why not try using it? Or, this person came up with this a decade ago and it was just hidden, but here it is. Or General Convention put this thing out and I never heard about it even as a priest until I did this research, things like that. So you've got options under each section. One of the big ones under the lessons is that we suggest that you may try a different reading for the second reading, essentially replace the epistle unless you want to swap it around, usually the epistle with a particular reading. And we'll go over that, what those are and where you can find them. But for each of the sections, you can have something to do differently. Every single one of these items are footnoted. So if you want to use this, please take a look at where it came from, who wrote it. It's all in the endnotes. There are well over 100 endnotes telling you exactly where this came from. And so you can just go through and there's a variety of different things. In some areas, it just puts it right there in the text. In other areas, particularly if there's either many options or if this is a particularly sensitive area, we had some bishops be very concerned that we, even using cautionary language to put an alternative directly in this resource is scary because they feel that it's pushing alternatives too much, particularly either doing the Eucharistic prayers or the creed. So in those two areas, if you have a more generous bishop, as I do, then you'll be able to find under the creed, go to this page, there'll be more resources, but I'm not going to put it right in here. And that actually got us past, for instance, once we made that change, the bishop in Virginia allowed this to go through. So, negotiating and figuring these things out. So for anyone who is a priest, there are some notes which are just opinions, but things to help you think through of how you might select a particular prayer and which prayer you might use for creation out of the ones that we have in our books. And then there's alternatives, additional ones that are included. And then same thing with the daily office. Additional verses to begin the service, different confessions, a variety of different psalms you might use as an invitatory instead of the Venite, different canticles to just emphasize, hey, these might be really good canticles to use, or maybe use some of the hymns that we have selected. There are some really interesting Lord's prayers that I encourage you to have a conversation with your parish before you use some of them. But for instance, this one here I'm highlighting is a responsive, a kind of a call and response. I did this my first year up here in Maine. One of my parishes loved it. We did it the whole time. One of my parishes hated it, and we just did it the first Sunday, and the other 4 Sundays we did something different. You just don't know until you try. Different suffrages and so forth. So those are the two liturgical resources for running a Sunday service or an evening prayer during the week, something like that. I'm going to skip the resources for a second. We're going to go back up to the lectionary, and I want to show you a little bit about the lectionary. So you can see that one thing we have not done yet is update this guide for the feast day that was added. So this still has the World Day of Prayer, which is the ecumenical celebration founded by the Eastern Orthodox. It is now has been added. So this information is now out of date. It will be updated. But this goes through and gives you suggestions for what you might do of a particular day. And so it just gives you some notes. Hey, what about this? What about that? For each of these days. And it's newly expanded. If you've only used this in previous years, previous to last year, you would only see the Sundays. Now it has certain feasts that land during the season of creation. which nicely works out to actually space out. So you've got a Sunday and then a feast, and a Sunday and a feast. So this is a new section that just gives you some ideas that you might do. And then there's the lectionary proper. Here's this is the lectionary for the holy days, so that they're the same every year. And then year A, B, and C, they do vary. And they vary based on the calendar as well. So there's actually 6 Sundays for each of these, because depending on which year it is, it will start either on proper 17 or 18. So there's extras. Just check that out. And what each of these do is they go through the proper of the Sunday, and they take the format, they take the structure, but they write it with some emphasis on creation. And then it goes through each of the readings that you would normally have assigned for the Sunday, from the track 1, track 2. And it says a brief note of hopefully just to get you started of how you might think about, meditate on, or preach a particular passage with something to do with creation. Just a brief note, just a little inspiration to hopefully get you started and you come up with an even better idea yourself. And then we have suggested, if your bishop allows, and if you'd like to do it, you may pick a different reading to replace the epistle. I have always the epistle first, the one that's selected, but then an additional couple that will let you rotate through. So if you do this on a 3-year basis, you'll never repeat the readings. There's 2 now per Sunday. And then a note on the gospel as well. And then for each one, I have a few different preaching prompts that will encourage you to draw on some of the readings and just go in a little bit more detail about how you might preach. And these are just some suggestions, again, just to get you started. So if your priest is saying, well, I'm not really sure what I would do, you say, well, here's some notes. Or if you're trying to do your own service, it might just get you started again. If you're getting stuck with a reading, some of them are a little harder to connect, and you think, oh, I'm not sure how to do this. This would hopefully get you started. This goes through all of the different ones for years A, B, and C. Pretty straightforward there. And then we'll conclude with the resources. So the resources are pretty extensive. Again, this is just a wonderful indication of the richness of our tradition, how much there's just already out there. Some of these items are directly called out in the liturgy guide, so it'll say, go to this page if you want to look this up. Others are just extras that you might want to, like, for instance, quotes on creation are short little paragraphs that might be great to, like, stick in your bulletin every Sunday or put out in a newsletter or something like that. There's books and curriculums you could use for formation or to learn more. There's hymns to use. So there's some of these things are really just on their own, kind of standalone. So just briefly, you've got collects and different prayers. We have our litanies, especially good to use at the beginning of the season. Some canticles that might be of use. Maybe these are special canticles you might use for a morning prayer service. Again, if your bishop allows, or if you're doing this as a non-primary Sunday service, you're allowed to do a different creed or affirmation of faith. I really like this first one here. It comes to us from South Indian Church. And then there's a couple others. One of them just basically a passage of scripture. And then a third one comes from a confession of St. Patrick, and it has the very specific track down exactly where that came from, which I inherited this in my parish and thought it was really wonderful, but I really wanted to know where it came from. And so did the work to say, oh, okay, it comes from here. So you can, again, reassure your congregation, here's where it comes from. There are also 3 Eucharistic prayers that have been developed by various communities. And each of these, again, if your bishop allows, can be used for your service. They've all been given permission. And again, the authors and the communities are all footnoted. There are readings, and these readings are often suggested for a particular Sunday, but you can just swap them out and do them differently if you'd like. And they come from a variety of different things. They are roughly in chronological order. And they go from, so here we have a Jewish writer. We have a lot of, so we have some church fathers and some Eastern Orthodox, various different folks, jumping fairly quickly up into the modern time. And we start getting, it's a couple from Howard Thurman. There's just a lot of different things. A couple excerpts from Pope Francis and various things. And I've also divided out a section, I believe, that's separate, that's not theological per se, but they're more of a literary or activist reading that's a little more secular in tone, but really I think could also be a very good reading. And then finally, some references of readings that you might take from Scripture, whether you're doing a Bible study or something. And again, just a reference and a brief note on why this might have been concluded, what it might be saying to us. And it concludes, this is one thing that I took a little bit of advantage of being able to put this together and put in a translation of the Genesis account that I made during seminary. So there's an option there for a different way of reading that first story that I hope gives it a little bit different flavor of that original story. Quotes, again, just this is what they look like. Go find them. There's just so many good ones. And then I think I only just wanted to note, lastly, that we do have lists of, hey, in the hymnal you have now, here are ones that might be more appropriate. Here are other hymnals that you might be able to use. And then finally, ending with some books and curriculums. So that's the guide. It's freely available. I encourage people to use it, to give feedback, to help me improve it. And we're hoping to now that we've put this together in its current place, I really hope that it'll become something that's taken up by the whole church and be contributed to and grow beyond just Margaret and myself. So that is the guide. I know it's a lot, but there's a lot in it. You're welcome to ask questions or go for that. So I'm now going to turn this over to Jay to talk about how he's implemented these.
Thank you very much, John. And I'm just super grateful to meet you sort of in person, even though it's online, because I have greatly appreciated that resource that you just walked us through. It is not just for all the things that are there, but the way that it stimulates our theological imaginations and our liturgical work. So thank you. And to Margaret, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a really remarkable resource, and I want to commend it to everybody's use. And by the way, your bishop is a dear friend of mine, so I'm not surprised that he's generous with this. So let me just give you a little bit of background about how we moved into the season of creation celebration that we have here at All Saints Parish in Saugatuck, Michigan. I had mostly an academic career before I came to this parish as rector. I was teaching in Berkeley, California, in a couple of places at the Graduate Theological Union, at Pacific School of Religion. I was in the doctoral faculty and also at CDSP, the Episcopal Seminary. I'm a theologian, so my area is in critical social theory and the way that religious leaders work in movements for social change. I say all that because back early 2000s, my theological work turned toward theology and ecology very broadly, and especially the role of other than human animals in Christian traditions, and became really passionate about the connections between our engagement with the wider world of God's creation and our calling as Christians to dismantle racism and white supremacy, and also to engage faithfully in dismantling misogyny and homophobia. I'm tossing out a lot of woke words there, but the reason I'm doing that is because I think it's one of the great gifts of the season of creation is that it invites that kind of integration of multiple concerns, social and economic justice, care for the creation, all of it in a beautiful kind of way. So I responded to a call and a desire to return to full-time parish ministry. And this little parish that I've grown to love deeply here in Saugatuck, Michigan, was wanting to figure out how to reach out into the wider shoreline community here in Michigan with more impact with the gospel. And they wanted to do that in two ways. One with LGBTQ people and inclusion, and with the environment and ecology. And I said, that's my job. So I was very excited about coming here and learning from these good people about how we could do that work together. And so we started small, really. We did education groups around environmental issues. The first couple of seasons of creations, I've been here for 6 years. Seasons of creation, we simply used some collects, and I preached on those themes. And then we just kept adding some things to the season. And as we did educational things together. And I guess I want to underscore how helpful that has been in this parish to invite people to think carefully in an educational setting, whether it's a book study, a book group, or having speakers come in to raise awareness about ecological issues, global climate chaos, and then invite people to say, what difference does this make in how we pray as a faith community and how we worship, and what are the connections? How do we connect the dots? And so I'll show you a liturgy leaflet in a moment. But last year, uh, I said only tongue in cheek, but only partially tongue in cheek in the chat box, that I sort of have gone rogue, wild departures from rubrics and so on. I'm sure now that I'm on this Zoom in public and it's being recorded, the canon police are going to show up here in Saugatuck, and I'm going to be arrested. But we we've really gone wholehearted, full-throated with all of these resources. And the way we've been able to do that is, again, through education. Just one quick example. Last year, we read together as a parish one of John Philip Newell's books on Celtic Christianity. And it turns out that John Philip Newell has written, among many, many things, a Celtic version of the Lord's Prayer, which is really beautiful. And so, and it has a more creation texture to it. It really emphasizes that aspect of it. And so by doing that book study together as a parish, it made perfect sense to incorporate it into our Sunday worship for the season of creation. So again, another example of doing very deliberate educational work that feeds into the liturgical stuff. Another important aspect of the work here at All Saints has been to make these connections to the wider social impact that we want to be having in this shoreline region. And where we've landed now these last 2 years is really trying to be deliberate about how our regular liturgical year shapes our witness in the wider world. And the way we do that intentionally now is 3 times during the year. In February for Black History Month, in June for LGBTQ Pride Month, and then in September for the season of creation. And we take the season of creation as an opportunity to weave all of that together. And I'm not exaggerating when I say last year it became clear, and it's really clear this year, the season of creation has become nearly as important as Christmas and Easter to the people in this parish. People are so excited right now. It's like, oh, it's August, season of creation is coming up. They're really looking forward to it. And what is so wonderful about that is that it lends itself to almost an immediate connection between how we're praying at the Eucharistic table and what we're doing in the wider world that is in crisis. And it's a very rich way of inviting people into that connection. And I think I'm able to share my screen. Is that, yes, I see that I am. That's awesome. Some of you, I bet all of you are familiar with the General Convention resolution in 2022 about climate change. And I just want to share that with you. It's, whoops, wait a minute. Share. Oh, I think that's it. Yep. So I'll just read this. The 80th General Convention of the Episcopal Church in 2022 declared global climate change an all-encompassing social crisis and moral emergency that impacts and interconnects every aspect of pastoral concern, including health, poverty, employment, racism, social justice, and family life, and that can only be addressed by a great work involving every sector of society, including the church. And the reason I wanted to share that is because I've been sharing that with this parish since 2022 to help underscore why it's so important that we're doing this work. We're in an emergency. You know, global scientists, I think, if I may, David's, your work as a climatologist, I'm sure you would underscore this as well. We are in a planetary emergency. And that resolution, I appreciate that resolution so much because it says we have to put all of our resources into this. This isn't a luxury. It's not a layering over. It's not just a patina. This is our great work right now. It has to be. So it's also helpful, by the way, to use that General Convention resolution if you're trying to persuade a bishop that you want to be doing these liturgical resources. You can say, "Dear Bishop, it's an emergency." And in times of emergency, we sometimes have to break rubrics and canons for the sake of our pastoral work. So I will
Okay.
just share brief. Oh, go ahead,
I just
John.
jump in. An extra piece there is if you're trying to persuade, I always look at enriching our worship. Volume 1 has really great notes at the beginning of why do we try new liturgies, and actually we need to be doing this to see if they work. There's the extra piece that you could couple with.
Thank you, John. Yes, that's great. And also, one of the things that I do is we have 2 liturgies on a Sunday morning here at All Saints. And so I have just designated the first one, that 8:30 in the morning, to be our primary service of worship. And that is straight on prayer book. So if, people want to come to just like a 1979 uh, Eucharistic liturgy, great, come to 8:30. And then we go outside at the 10:15 liturgy under big tents that we have set up all summer long out on our parish hall lawn. And we use what I'm about to show you in a minute. We use these other liturgical resources for that. So that's also a helpful way to say, no, our primary worship service is right out of the prayer book. This is an experimental liturgy we're using for these extraordinary times. So I'll just share a little bit about what we produce here for the parish, and then I'll see if you have any questions or if you'd like me to say anything more about any of this, because there's so much I could say because I love this material and this work so much. So the first thing I'll show you is we publish a little booklet every year. We draw heavily from the seasonofcreation.org, the International Steering Committee and Advisory Committee. By the way, if you haven't surfed through those resources, oh my goodness, just an amazing treasure trove of resources. And if you pair that with the work that John and Margaret have done for particularly Episcopal resources, it's a lifetime of wonderful stuff. So we here at All Saints we feature the theme that the International Steering Committee has come up with each year. We actually use the lectionary that the Season of Creation folks have, the 3-year lectionary that they put together a few years back. So I provide a little bit of background on the lectionary, and then they have little themes for each week that become wonderful for our visual imagination. All Saints in Saugatuck is along the so-called Arts Coast of Michigan. So we use a lot of visual images. We have a lot of artists in the parish, so we have a lot of cool art that happens here too. So the first thing I'll show you is this little booklet that explains the Season of Creation for people who don't know what it's about, and also this year's theme. And we get a lot of visitors from the surrounding community during this time too, and it's a great boost for our advertising and marketing in the local paper as well. Just throwing that out there. Let's see if I can do this. I appreciate it. Where are you? Let's open this up. Sorry, not usually this technology challenged. Now let's see if I can do that. Yeah, there we go. This is this year's booklet that will go out to the parish starting next week. The International Steering Committee has chosen this as this year's theme, Living Water, and they have a wonderful theological, historical, biblical essay on this based on this passage from Ezekiel. And what I do every year is I include this little snippet on what the Season of Creation is so that people understand what this is all about in part. There's the history. John just gave us this history a little bit ago about how it started. There's the information about living water, this year's theme. And then those are the 4 weeks in September this year: forest, land, wilderness, and river. And there is there are lectionary texts that go with those themes. That's an old map of Saugatuck where we are. And then we have been also spending time on trying to get to know some of our indigenous neighbors here in Michigan. So we try to pair our work with the Season of Creation with the invitation to pay closer attention to what our indigenous neighbors can tell us, and we must learn from them about our relationship with the land. So our closest neighbors are the Potawatomi. That's their little emblem there on that page. And so we have a land acknowledgement. We don't just say the land acknowledgement, we actually spend time in prayer with it and to try to discern how we can be better neighbors for the sake of healing and restorative justice. So we connect that to our work with the season of creation. And there is Blessed Sarah, Blessed Leo, with their quotes that they have this year for the season of creation. So that's the booklet that is just inviting people to wrap their heads around what is the season of creation, what is it we're going to be doing together. And what I want to share with you now, I know I'm talking quickly, and I'll finish by just showing you a liturgy leaflet from last year's season of creation, so you can see how we do this liturgically, and then see if you have questions. Stop share, which is not a great way to do it, but let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. Now, whoops. Where'd you go? There you are. This is our Eucharistic, one of our Eucharistic liturgies from last year's season of creation. It was the first Sunday of the season. The theme that year for the first Sunday was ocean. And so in our liturgy leaflet, I include a little bit about what the season of creation is all about. Last year's theme from the International Steering Committee was Peace with Creation. And so we had some of those alternative music resources that John was talking about. We take full advantage of those, which are some really wonderful things. So we do that. I take some liberty with the things. So John took liberties with the prayer book, so I take liberties with John. And so these are some of the ways that gets manifested, and there are separate collects that are used for each Sunday. Readings. I also take the season of creation as an opportunity to invite people to hear very familiar biblical texts in a new way. And so I try to use different translations that will invite that freshness. I happen to really love Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible, so we often use his translation. We also use, if you're not familiar with the First Nations version of the Christian Testament, it is one of the most beautiful translations I've ever read. It's by a committee of indigenous peoples in the Americas. And we try to be very careful so as not to be culturally appropriating these resources. And we try to respect what it is about indigenous sensibilities that would lead to a particular translation that's different from us, who are mostly white settler parish. But we do use both the New Testament, the Epistle, and the Gospel from the First Nations version. That's what that is right there and there. And then we use a profession of faith that is based on the stuff that you'll find in the resource that John outlined, but also on stuff that has come out of the Church of England, has some really interesting stuff. So this is kind of a mashup profession of faith from those sources. The prayers of the people, it doesn't matter what season you're in, the prayers of the people can be wild card every Sunday, as you probably know. The prayer book rubrics give us that permission. And so we try to do that with vigor. This is very close to the confession of sin you'll see in that resource that John outlined for us. I want to really, I'll pause before getting to it. I was so moved by the invitation, John, in I think it's Eucharistic Prayer 2 in the resources section of your guide, because there's a little paragraph. And when I read it, and I'm not kidding, I teared up because I found it such a moving way to think about this. You have a little paragraph in there that says, here you can insert something about your local landscape or your geography or where you are very particularly. And I realized that, oh, yes, yes, yes. To tie this universal, timeless prayer of Eucharist to a very real, right now, this land, this place, location seemed to me to be exactly the kind of thing we need to do more often for our ecological work. And so we used that in this liturgy. And I wanted to share with you, if you don't mind, what that looks like when we did that for Saugatuck, which people absolutely loved. So it was this. I'll just read this briefly. It is right in all times and in all places to thank and praise you, Creator of all. We praise you here where the Kalamazoo River greets a great inland sea with a kiss, where the old town of Singapore rests beneath the moving sands of ancient dunes, where trees once stood, then fell for human habitations, and where rain and snow, field and forest alike set forth the glory of your creative spirit. And we also mention here that together with angels and archangels, we are in solidarity with the Three Fires Confederacy of the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe, and calling to mind all your beloved creatures here, from lake sturgeon and pileated woodpeckers to the mighty oak and the modest beauty of springtime trillium and autumnal asters. We join our voices with all creation, etc. And then there's the Celtic Lord's Prayer that John Philip Newell has created that people here really love in the season of creation. And we have a post-communion prayer along those same themes and a blessing that is deeply rooted in the season of creation themes. So I know that was ridiculously fast, but I wanted to just offer a snapshot of the importance of education as it shapes liturgical revision, and also the power of location, where you are. Like, what is your geography? What are your trees? What is the water? What's the air like where you are, where you breathe, et cetera, et cetera. And then connecting it to the wider concerns we have around racial justice and so on. So I'll stop there and take a breath because I know I was talking very fast, and see if you might have any questions about all of that. We're very fortunate here in the Diocese of the Great Lakes, by the way, that we have a visiting assisting bishop right now because we don't have a diocesan bishop, but I very dutifully and with due diligence reported what I was hoping to do and asked her permission. And I was very upfront. I said, I am going rogue here, dear Bishop Anne, so I need your permission. And if you don't give it, I will be disappointed, but I will also be obedient because I am a faithful priest of the church. So, but she was enthusiastic, and so I'm very grateful for that.
There was a question, Jay, in the chat of if you would be willing to share your booklets with us, your Sunday booklet.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yep. Happy to freely send whatever it is. I can put my
So if
email
you
address.
what you can do is
Oh,
I've emailed you and you just reply to that email. I'm working on the follow-up email that'll come out after this, and it'll just be part of that email.
you are uber organized everywhere you go, Heather. It's amazing.
It's why they pay me the big bucks or something. So this is the time, friends. Public questions that you'd like to ask now.
By the way, Robin, thank you for that. And you are in my old neck of the woods, St. Charles, St. Charles. I grew up in Wheaton, And St. Barnabas Glen Ellen was my sponsoring parish for priesthood. So that going to seminary.
Doesn't sound
So
like we're going to be able to get you back from Saugatuck.
I doubt it.
What do you, John or Jay, um, it sounds like a wonderful, warm, welcoming, parish and a good fit for you and for John up in Maine. Um, my parish is progressive in most ways, but might consider the full-on frontal that you've done as
Yes.
as um, too much all at once.
Yeah.
So I'd have to weave this tapestry slowly
Yes.
and with certain groups more than others or optional things versus others. Any advice on that? Not so much pushback, but reticence because they're not in it like I'm in it, right? So it's going to be a lot at once to do what your booklet has.
Yes, it's true. John, what would you say to that as I think about that? Good question.
My suggestion is start with some of the official church resources, such as that resolution, which is included in the booklet, if or in my in the guide as
Mhm.
well. Point out that our Anglican Communion is one of the sponsoring groups behind
Right.
seasonofcreation.org. You can find that info if you download that guide from seasonofcreation.org. Anglican Communion is the top one,
Mhm.
alphabetical. Um, and point out that, over 50 dioceses have already endorsed the use of these materials, so that it should at least get it over the hump of like, okay, we could consider this. My suggestion then is if you don't have a priest who's just like pushing it themselves and you're trying to kind of nudge people to try it, is consider if there's a liturgical committee or form one where you can talk this through with people, where people can
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
oh, that's interesting, or wait a minute, where does that come from? I'm suspicious of that. I know I had a conversation with a very conservative parishioner the first time I did it up in this area, and she really was just like, oh, this is heresy. And we sat down and talked for a couple hours, and I was able to say, well, this comes from this century, and then we got this, and she left was like, okay, we're fine, because she had the chance to have questions, to see that it's not just made up. And that's where I hope those hundreds of endnotes will help. And being able to look around and say, other churches are doing this. This comes from South Africa. This comes from here. This comes from there. These are not just invented things, but it'll take time to form people in that understanding. And then if you're going to do that in a small group and you can get it through to that group, then do some of that with the congregation. Hey, in the bulletin, this is where this comes from, or a little bit of announcement at the beginning. Hey, this is what we're doing. So the more you can draw people into the journey and show them what the church has been doing for so long, I think that helps.
Good idea.
Amen to all of that. And the advisory, I think he was a member of the advisory committee. Mark Andrus was the Episcopal Bishop of California. And so again, it's like you get the Anglican Communion and you've got Episcopal Bishop. So it's not this weird sort of outlier thing. It's very mainstream. And that's why I included Sarah Mullally and Pope Leo, in our booklet as a kind of literal imprimatur, right? They're like, you can't get
It's
much more
legitimate.
official than that. So that helps. I will also say where pushback comes from when it comes is usually around things that sound activist oriented.
Mhm.
So the International Season of Creation.org materials will always include these calls to action, things that you can do that are more practical for the sake of the environment and for ecological renewal and healing. And, you know, we really are in a planetary emergency and we have to stop burning fossil fuels. We just have to. There's no getting around it. However, the fossil fuel industry has been really good at persuading an awful lot of people that that's a radical leftist agenda, right? So as soon as you start even hinting toward practical applications of our liturgical work, some people get nervous about, are we going to be kind of out there on the fringe and so on. So you have to, there's some education that goes with this. Again, that's so important to help people understand why this matters. And baby steps, that liturgy I just showed you, that's not what I did the first year I was here, let me tell you. And I had to learn. I had a learning curve as well, which is I'm so grateful for John and Margaret's resource that helped so much in
Mhm.
putting this together and taking it, baby steps along the way, um, was very helpful.
Yeah, I've done a couple nibbles in the sense that I put green tips out on the fellowship tables a couple of Sundays a month. Some of those are spiritual, some of those are practical. And we put things in the weekly newsletter. I'll put a prayer or something that's creation centered, and it's from the creation care or the green team to kind of get little baby steps. And we
The
now have a
green
new
team, I
priest who's
like that.
enthusiastic about it. So I'm psyched.
I see David has the electronic hand up.
Thank you. Something that we found was helpful, we found it by accident, is sometimes you have to meet people where they are and use the language that they appreciate. And what it was we were given money to install solar cells, solar panels, and that's all we could use the money for. And the finance
Ah,
committee was not really excited about it because they were thinking, well, we could use that money for A, B, C, and D. But since it was restricted, they grudgingly went along with it. And 2 years later, they came back and said, can we put some more solar cells on? Solar panels. And I said, why? He says, because we're getting a 6% return on our investment, which was the highest investment at that time that they were seeing any place. So that was a situation where they might not have been all that. And of course, I'll hand it to them. They were trying to be good with the church's resources. In this situation, it was the monetary resources. So, they had no bad intention, but to them, this was a waste of money instead. But when they understood it was, oh, we're actually going to be saving a lot of money, that they got on
right.
board. So sometimes we have to put it in the language that folks will understand from their vantage point. And as I said, no feeling towards these folks. They were trying to be, was that a
Of
good
course.
use of our limited resources? So I understood where they were coming from.
Finding language that people are already comfortable with and frameworks that they are already comfortable with is just a great strategy to help introduce new ideas, right? And that I think I'll put, I'll see if John wants to respond to this, but I saw a question in the chat from Greg Schneider if there's a suggested or model liturgy for the Feast of Creation. Not yet.
I was just looking up just to see if I could get some information on that. My understanding is that right now, this step that was just taken, that was announced in the Christian Century, was that the committee, the ecumenical committee that puts together the revised common lectionary, has now added the entry with readings for this day just now. And so we do not have a particular liturgy for that feast or any particular resources from our church. This is we're on the cutting edge of this is
It's
happening. They're
very
running
new,
to keep up
very
with the
new.
treadmill right now. So you can use things in these guides to come up with one, but there is not like something where we have a special liturgy in occasion, the Book of Occasional Services does not have an entry for this yet. I'm assuming the next year or two we will get some, but we don't currently.
Right. Thank you. I know throughout the season of creation, we use all of these resources to modify our worship services already. I was just thinking, if there is one already that's been established for this, I definitely want to begin using it as soon as it's available. But we'll just use the resources we have and put one together. So thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you to Jay and John, and everyone who is watching this afterwards or reviewing materials. I think Jay and John are willing to get questions from you directly also via email. Is that true?
You bet. You bet.
And I would suggest, if you can, I will put the email address in here. If you send it to a specific email address, it automatically goes to both myself and Margaret, and maybe in the future to other people that might be part of this. So that's the link to any feedback on this particular set of liturgies, suggestions for improvement, questions, examples of how it's been used, anything. You can send to that email address and it'll go straight to Margaret and myself.
Oh, great. Look at that. Okay.
And that I will add that to the follow-up email. So
And
friends,
you can find the link to this. Heather was just asking for that. I want to make sure that I don't. I was just going to grab the link straight from
sounds great.
the.
Those will be in the follow-up emails. So
Yes.
we will we are grateful. Rounds of applause for you both.
I just had